City Council member, Democratic candidate, the Honorable Christine Quinn.
Hi, how are you?
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
They're going to get bored, but I'm going to repeat this. New York City is home to over 1,300 nonprofit cultural institutions, hundreds of, well, at least thousands of artists. I think Williamsburg, I heard, has more artists per square inch than any other place in the country.
Really?
But a lot of them are leaving because they can't afford the rents. Nonprofit culture attracts 23.8 million tourists to New York, generates an estimated $8.1 billion a year, which is a major contribution to the city's economy. It also generates 120,000 jobs, but it receives less than 0.25% of the overall city expense budget. What have you done in the city council when it comes to funding of the arts?
Well, in the city council, I think if you look at, and I want to give credit where credit's due, both in my tenure as speaker, but the truth is before that, when Speaker Miller was speaker and Speaker Vallone as well, the council has long been the place that stands up and preserves funding for cultural organizations, both the larger ones, the CIGs, and the smaller program groups out there. Now, that's a good thing that we've done and an important thing that we've done. But the truth is we need to, and this will happen when I'm mayor, change more fundamentally how the budget is set up. You know, every year since really the council got budget powers after the charter change, basically every idea the council, every initiative or funding the council had put in the budget the year before gets cut out, even if you're in a year where there are surpluses. It's one thing if there's a year where there really has to be cuts. Now look, I'm under no illusion that every idea we ever had in the council is a good one. Most. But that every funding idea we had every single time is a bad one and should be zeroed out is absurd. And so what ends up happening is the budget is not a reflection, in my opinion, of the priorities of the mayor. And then you end up in this real challenge where you're fighting every year if your cultural groups or libraries to exist. But this problem becomes compounded significantly in years when you are in deficits and you actually have to have conversations around cuts. We've had in areas of culturals and libraries, you know, looking at $100 million a year type thing just to stay constant, if not more. So when I'm mayor, what we're going to do is have a budget that's really a priority-based budget. One where in the baseline of the budget, we have the things that we can afford, first and foremost, but the things that are fundamental to the city of New York. One of those is going to be cultural funding. Why is cultural funding fundamental to the city of New York? For the reasons you just said. And because and this is hard to put a dollar amount on, it helps fuel the soul of the city of New York. And remember, after September 11th, there were a number of significant things that the city government did, and the Mayor Giuliani did. Two of the very important things he did, which is important for us to remember, is he called the head of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And he said, you can't be closed. You can't be closed. If you're closed, the world will think in part, I don't know exactly what he said, I'm paraphrasing, the world in part will think that the city is closed because our cultural institutions fuel the soul of this country. And they're that significant. So we need to remember that when we're thinking about funding.
Then he did call the Brooklyn Museum and said, I want to close you. So.
Well, that's a whole different kettle of fish. Right. He said, you're not the kind of beacon we're looking for. That's right.
Actually,
that's right.
The last mayor to...
That's funny. I'm taking you on the road. That's good.
Ed Koch was the last mayor, surprisingly, to have been generous to the arts. And Peter Vallone was the city council leader who probably pushed hardest to get funding for the arts. Meanwhile, at the same time, we have the city giving money to startups to establish headquarters in the city. We give all sorts of tax breaks and incentives to banks. The American International Group, AIG, the insurance company at the center of the 2008 financial crisis, continued to benefit from a $23.8 million abatement from New York City. At the same time, it was being bailed out with $180 billion in federal money. And so we can find money, even in tight times, for these corporations, but those other corporations, which we pointed out are really important to the health of the city, suddenly become targets whenever we will have to cut money.
You're absolutely right. And that is a problem in the way we have done budgeting. I'm proud that in the council we've kind of been that final line of defense. But you're to kind of use I don't know why I would, but I'm going to a sports analogy here at this arts event. But we want to put arts on the offensive in the budget, right? And look at how we look at an industry. I know that seems a little awkward to say in arts because I don't want to minimize that, but in industries are industry. And part of what we're talking about is arts as a cultural and as an economic engine, and they should be part of that discussion. And one of the other things I want to do when I'm mayor is change and kind of broaden how the Economic Development Corporation looks at things. They've done good work in many areas and had focus in specific areas. They've never focused on arts in a really significant way as an economic engine, and that's something I would change, which would go into the kind of points you raised. But let me just mention one or two other things quickly. One new program the council put in place a number of years ago, well, two actually. One is using the science-based cultural institutions through Urban Advantage to help do teacher training and help get science training and science teachers to be even more successful. That's a model that Miami is now replicating and other cities. That's the kind of thing we should work on, as well as the CASA program, which Councilmember Dominic M. Recchia Jr. created, where you partner schools and cultural institutions, has been enormously successful as well. And those are creative ways we can use our institutions to even greater power.
So are you willing to commit 1% of the city's budget to support of the arts institutions?
I'm not, and I'm not going to, there's other events, parks, et cetera, where people want
to. I wonder if we're going to get one candidate to say yes tonight.
You're not. I bet you're not. I bet you're not. But you know what? That's not a bad thing. Because look, you actually want candidates to come and say those kind of conversations have to happen in a budget context, not in a political context. And I don't think that's a bad thing that people are not, necessarily saying that. It's the best that I'm not saying it, because I'm not saying it in the nicest way possible. But
speaking of the partnerships between schools and independent cultural organizations to fill in, frankly, to do backfill where there are not enough arts teachers. That,
or
of course,
in case of science, helping in that area.
But we're talking about arts and culture here. So, and that isn't free, and those budgets have...
Science is culture. Ask the Museum of Natural History.
Okay. It's not arts, though. Anyhow...
especially the Petri dish.
The costs, the budget for supplies, musical instruments, equipment has been just astonishingly slashed the last 6 years. There is a resolution, has been introduced 6 years ago or something, Resolution 837, to dedicate a line of funding to arts education in the schools. Why haven't you passed that?
I'll take a look at that resolution. One of the challenges with dedicating things in the Department of Education budget like that is, we think of schools as mayoral control, which there is, but the DOE is not a full necessarily city agency, so some of the stuff that you could do theoretically in, parks or DOT or something is not necessarily the same. But the larger point there of getting more money into the classroom, A, generally, but B, specifically for arts, is something you're going to see happen when I'm mayor. We have so much
Really,
money.
You'll do better than this administration?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can't tell you the number, but I make that commitment to do better tonight. And I know we can find those resources in the Department of Education. We have way too many outside contracts for things that are just not as critical as the kind of programs and funding that you're talking about.
Should, for instance, every school for that matter, have a music teacher, which at this point they're nowhere close, not even half?
That would be a goal I would want to move towards. I can't tell you when we're going to get there, and I would want to do it in prioritized order, and I would start with the schools with the worst reading levels, because that's the place where you would want to start first with arts and music. We're starting in September in a partnership between the council, the DOE, and Robin Hood in 20 middle schools where 7th and 8th graders read below grade level, extending the school day by 2 hours. Harvard Ed Labs is going to come in and partner to do literacy in those 2 hours, and part of the way they're going to do it is through music and art. So I think that would be where I'd want to start with adding those teachers in.
Great. Christine, Quinn, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.